Hello and welcome to a continuation of my series on battle maps, their breakdowns, mechanics, and stuff like that. Mostly combat-oriented content. Originally, this started off as a series where I was going to do just the individual demon lords in our Out of the Abyss campaign, but as we are not returning to the Underdark for a little bit, and I don't know when the next time they may face a Demon Lord, I didn't want to slow down on any of the content, as I feel like though the views aren't there yet, we're still growing as a channel. I feel like it's some of the best content that I've been putting out so far, and I think it's also very useful because not many people get to run these higher level demon lords, and people also might not know how to run or create a battle map designed for something that's supposed to be more powerful or a little bit more complex, or even just add in mechanics to combat that could be reflected in the map. For example, the cages in the Dweeblix encounter slash the Pudding King, and the healing altar with zuggtmoy, where I consistently had Myconid, the Chamberlain, healing other Myconids with the aura inside of it. So I wanted to go and take a step back towards the first dungeon I designed for our Out of the Abyss campaign. Now there were a ton of awesome things in the book that we are still going to do, but I wanted something to more gauge and allow them to become more familiar with each other, how I run combat, how I run dungeons, and also having them figure out overall how they could approach a dungeon that is expansive while also something they could flee from if it got too difficult. That was a lot of words, big ranting, but I hope you understand the context. So starting off, the first dungeon I designed for the Out of the Abyss campaign was called Glimmerdeep, and it was a mine that has been overrun by Kruthik. Now, Kruthik are a race that has been around for a while in D&D, but was more specifically reintroduced in Mordenkainen's Tome of Foes. An amazing book. I was so happy when it came out. It's one of the best purchases I had ever made during 5e in the golden age of it. There's so many great creatures. But specifically, I'm gonna delve into the Kruthik because they give a lot of flavor to the Underdark. They themselves are unique, like most D&D creatures, but they have a hierarchy when it comes to challenge rating. Meaning there is a lower version CR rating for some of them. There's a young Kruthik, then there's the adult Kruthik, and there's a Hive Lord. So there's a tier of difficulty. Whereas, back in the monster manual, some things may have like the Goblin and the Goblin Boss. This gives you a straightforward background on their stats and some lore. So, without further ado, I'm gonna read about the Kruthiks, and then I'm gonna introduce you into the battle map, which is actually the first of 3 dungeons that make up Glimmerdeep. Now, dungeons don't have to be as in-depth as this. Maybe you actually make more complex dungeons than me. But when I look back at it, I realize how much of an undertaking this was, and how much of the game time it took up. I don't regret designing it or running it. I wanted to gauge them as players. I wanted them to learn together, and I got all of that, but it made this chapter in our campaign longer than expected. and for good and ill. But overall, that's up to you to judge as well. If you want to come out, check the VOD sometime and catch up on our Out of the Abyss campaign, you can do that. You can catch us live on the Twitches. So let's jump into the lore of the Kruthiks and what they're all about, okay? Kruthiks are chitin-covered reptiles that hunt in packs and nest in sprawling subterranean warrens. They are attracted to sources of heat such as dwarven forges and pools of molten lava, and carve out lairs as close to such locations as possible. As they burrow through the earth, they leave behind tunnels, evidence that it is often the first clue to the nearby presence of a Kruthik hive. Kruthiks also have use of pre-existing underground chambers, incorporating them into their layers when they can. Kruthiks communicate with one another through a series of hisses and chittering noises. These sounds can often be heard in advance of a Kruthik attack. Whenever their lair is invaded, Kruthik guards send out an alarm by rapidly tapping the stone with their sharp legs. Yeah, and there's a little bit more lore. Their sharp senses, sharper weapons, and shared lair, which is what got me into using them. Kruthiks abide the presence of constructs, elementals, oozes, and undead, and use such creatures to help guard their hive. Kruthiks are smart enough to barricade some tunnels and dig new ones that keep their neighbors away from their eggs. So I decided that that I wouldn't necessarily use those creatures as their shared biome, I guess, their shared layer. So I added some other stuff, weaker ones, and spread them around. I'm a huge fan, and I've said this before, of Runehammer, and not only how he's designed his battle maps, but the mechanics slash what's the word? The DM advice, the tips on, like, for example, having like specifically short words or sentences that kind of embody the feel of a battle map. And this one I literally took to heart when designing this. So I wrote out Blood and Rust as the core sort of feeling and theme I wanted to go with. So I wanted red stone. They do live near warmer areas. I didn't really incorporate that much. It wasn't a big focus, and I didn't want to introduce too many things at once. So I designed Glimmerdeep to, like I said, explore the players together, the mechanics, blah blah blah. But when designing it, I wanted it to be a multi-layered dungeon. I wanted each section or battle map to be large, with different pathways, but encounters spread out. And that was something I hadn't really done before, because I would design a dungeon to be enclosed in these ruins or something with man-made walls dividing and doors. So this was an experiment for me to create a multi-layered dungeon that wasn't closed off by doors and stuff. I had to figure out if it's going to be this huge room or chamber or cave system, how was I going to separate encounters from each other and keep them feeling unique? So we talked about the purposes of this, the Kruthiks themselves. Let's jump into the battle map, and like I said, remember, this is the first of 3. But it in itself, once you see it, I think you'll understand. Can be a mini dungeon on its own. We'll go over the map, and potentially we'll go over the monsters inside. No, we'll definitely go over the monsters inside. Because honestly, you can change it however way you want. I think I balanced it well enough. There were some close calls. But yeah, let's jump into it. Booyah! So welcome to Blood and Rust, the introduction to Glimmerdeep, the first battle map, which has, as you can see, a ton of different places for the characters to explore, to fight, and there's some Easter eggs, some treats, things they can use throughout, and one of my favorite sort of rule of cool moments, um, as the players started to realize, I put things in these maps for them to create solutions to problems that normally there might not be one. There might not be a solution to this problem. And we'll start with that. So let's go to the entrance, the cave mouth. Starting off with new players, it's important to label these things. It's a little harder to see probably. I'll zoom in a bit more. We have the cave mouth, and then we have this intro area. So technically, this is part 1. This is part 2. And that leads to the rest of the dungeon. There is a secondary encounter here, which just highlights what I was gonna say before I got here, which is you can put any kind of monsters in this and make it work. You can use this as its own dungeon on its own. So I called it Blood and Rust because I was thinking of bleed mechanics and rust monsters. Bleed and I wanted red stone, so that was gonna be the vibe. Starting off, they would enter here, seeing the texture of the map. They would also see that overall there was some broken terrain that maybe sometimes they may have to jump down or take an elevated position. As here we have this thing called the rising platform. This just note, let me move this over here. Sort of note about that. They saw broken barrels that were obviously empty, but there was refuge here, just a culmination of garbage and stuff that they could probably sift through and ask me if there was something in there, which ended up being something. So we had this small area here, which I designed to have some rust monsters, which turned out to be a great starting fight. And there were some gemstones that would draw them in, and it was our first dungeon, so they weren't so much about like looking for traps or creatures nests, but they saw the eggs too, so there was some hints there, but they didn't really take it. Additionally, these things I added in case combat was getting too slow, and I also wanted it to introduce the bleeding mechanic that I was gonna use, but I didn't need to, and it seemed like overkill because eventually the battles were kind of heated. The Kruthiks, the rust monsters, not that they were dying or anything, but they were feeling the pressure, and I didn't need to add it in too much, so they just did some damage if you ended your turn there. And I had these, they're like basically like these weird plants that were breathing in and out as things drew nearer, and if you stayed within range they would shoot out these spikes. So it was a way to add like terrain or layer actions or layer threats, environmental danger, that's a better way, environmental danger or hazards per encounter, because there was some in this area and this was a fight, there was some here and this is a fight, along with this area, and some over here. So it ended up being such a great dungeon and to run, even on the first encounter. I gotta stop zooming out so much. So anyway, we had rust monsters here, which I'll show you the breakdown. I had a campsite here for them so they could sleep consistently, not have to go back to Thieves Hollow. But players are gonna play like a game. I don't really reward that kind of behavior. Nor do I'll punish you at some point for doing something that may annoy me. Leaving the dungeon and going back to town isn't really that annoying. Um, it was designed for them to understand that some of the dungeons could be more in depth, but I learned a lot and they had a lot of fun. They made some money. They got a ton of experience. They learned how each other they fight. They got coordinated. They ended up not even finding this until much later, even though it was so close to the entrance. Um, that being said, I had some treats here in case they wanted to add barricades or fortifications. There was some wood. They could create spears. There was a weapon there, which was like an extra sword in case the rust monsters really took out one of their weapons, which ended up happening. Um, Armor got corroded. Weapons got just wrecked. So they ended up needing a replacement weapon, which they had. But more specifically, they inspected this junk pile, and he rolled a high investigation. So I created some of this like moonshine alcohol substance, and he asked if he could coat his blade with it and armor. Would that protect from the rust monsters effect? And I was like, fuck yeah, it would. Why not? Now there's probably some rules lawyers out there or people who are more savvy with science, but like I said before, rule of cool, good investigation check. Didn't want us to just say no. That white. So yeah, we got Rustolum invented into the game. I think we ended up calling it Rustolum or something like that. It was a joke, and then I just said fuck it. That's what it's called. So they could rest here. In this area, I had carrion crawlers, and I hadn't even. This was gonna be. I couldn't figure out what to put there. I just left it empty, and then the day of, I added small, like 3 regular size carrion crawlers, and then just created an enlarged one. Put an E on it for enhanced. I doubled its hit points. I think I doubled the damage as well. Carrion crawlers themselves aren't that strong, but it was a fun fight. It wasn't that long. They had fun, funny moments, good action, and it just kept them on their toes. It wasn't meant to be overwhelming. It wasn't meant to punish them. I just thought it'd be interesting why there were no bodies anymore. So the rust monsters corroded all the metals and stuff, and the carrion crawlers ate all the bodies. Now, I thought of a fun reason why they would be there. It was basically they ended up fighting the Kruthiks over here, I think before. But regardless, they left the bodies of all the creatures they had slain, and then left the dungeon, then came back. So by that time, I had basically the carrion crawlers eat the bodies and get stronger. I didn't make them super strong. Like I said, I only added a more enhanced version, a bigger one, full. So here we had the Kruthik battle. There were some young Kruthik, a couple of adults, high AC, and that's the important thing about introducing something like this early. Let me zoom out a bit more for you guys. Introducing the Kruthiks, story-wise was good. It's the Underdark. It's a mine, but you don't get to playtest creatures often enough to know how strong they are. But the Kruthik have a really high AC, and I didn't realize that until they started fighting and started missing. And I wanted to take their ACs down a little bit, but then I just thought, we'll let this battle take place, and I'll figure out how to fix the encounters later. They ended up being victorious, as adventurers are. You gotta remember, they have a lot of tricks up their sleeves. Just believe in them, and they'll get it done. They have an armor class of 18, 39 hit points, or for me, 40, I think. 40 to 60 is what I made it. We'll get into that. But there's just a lot of different Easter eggs and opportunities. They ended up using this to refine the gemstones. I had an idea that that's maybe what it would be done for, but I didn't set in stone that that's what it was. It looked like a machine for, it could be anything. So there was another campsite here they could use. They ended up using it fine. Some more crystals to add to the, you know, the world lore that they got out of the mines. Left a lot of treasures behind. But then I had this area, and the funny thing is, I knew that I wanted it to have just like a hidden like item cache in here, but I may have went a little too far. They survived, don't be mad. I put a roper in there right here as this sort of like this object, just like stalactite hiding. And then as soon as they got close enough, like the monsters from Monsters Inc. just started jumping out and grabbing all of them. And yeah, it grabbed all of them, and they were not able to deal with it for a bit until they just up close, personal, used a flaming sphere. It was good. I felt like someone was gonna die. It was eating them, and they were missing, and they were all grappled. I did not think Roper would be that fun to run. I had designed an entire like battle map for like 3 or 4 Ropers to jump them in the Underdark in the future or at some point, just in general, because I thought it'd be cool. But this one Roper alone made such a crazy, funny, and terrifying moment. They got some stuff in here. I don't recall exactly. It's dependent on the time. I know I always like to give like a consumables, whether that be scrolls for a magic user or potions of healing and stuff. But like I said, if you are interested in running this, you can use it any way you see fit. I think it has enough storied environmental detail to fit anything. My point of saying that is that like there's some camping tents, there's crates, barrels, there's this machine. It could be used for anything. There's an alternative campsite. Maybe there were guards in this mine, or maybe it was taken over by orcs. Could be anything. You've got an extra cave mouth to lead maybe out or deeper into your own dungeon. Maybe it's the entrance to a dungeon. Maybe you have a dungeon and you just need a little bit more time for that night. You know, I feel like this came out really well. And overall, each map in this series for Glimmerdeep came out so well. And I'm so happy with how good I designed them, how well they played out. I wasn't disappointed, and almost everything was touched. So yeah, I was happy. Now I'll show you guys the map with the tokens. We're gonna jump to roll 20. If you have any questions, feel free to throw them in the comments. But let's get to it. Boom! Behold my stuff again. So this is the same thing. This is the map, except with a few things. There's the tokens for the rust monsters, and they were burrowed underground until it was time to fight. We have 3 of these mini Kruthiks. I think I had 4 in the actual battle. I don't remember. We had 3, but I know we had 2 adults. Oh, I don't remember. I redesigned this earlier today before I went to work. Not redesigned, just re-added in the tokens. This for sure is how it went. The carrions right here. So we had a carrion with 20 HP. We had 3 of those and one with 50, just to signify that it ate the bodies of the dead creatures and got big. Um, that was our adventuring group. Damn, so long ago. That was the roper. So yeah. I don't think I have to go that more in depth with the tokens, because I think I went too far in depth without them on the field, which would have been better. So you could have visualized a little bit more. Like I said, we had rust monsters going after their weapons and armor. We had these carrion crawlers, which were some extra combat fun, just a little more variety. We had the Kruthiks over here, and everything was pretty separated pretty well, in my opinion. You can be the judge. You'd have to watch the VOD to critique it. But this roper encounter up here ended up being the highlight of this. But oh, by the way, if I might have missed it, Glimmerdeep was, like I said, the first dungeon I created for them. The goal was to root out the Kruthik threat and destroy the Hive Lord, which we will get to in the next maps to come. We still have a lot more Glimmerdeep to go through. So Blood and Rust was the initial concept. How much I leaned into it is debatable, but it's a good starting point. It gave me something to aspire towards, or it gave me a lot of focus. So when designing your maps or a dungeon, kind of have a theme, not just the monsters, but an overall theme you might want to go for. There's a lot of diversity here because it's sort of, it's brought up that they share their layers with things to protect their eggs, And I thought it was interesting, and I wanted to see if I could incorporate that. So hope you enjoyed this video. I'm going to cut it here. The next one is going to be Glimmerdeep 2. What did I call it? Don't remember. Lots of blue and lots of lightning. And very, very, and I'll give you one hint. Rainbow shell. Don't think you've ever used this creature before. And that's kind of another thing that I try to do. I try to use as many new creatures as possible. If you take the time and watch our Out of the Abyss campaign, you will see that I have used a brand new monster in every encounter as often as possible. And the only time I reintroduce something used before is because the story sort of demands it. For example, the Demogorgon attacks one settlement, and we see him reoccur later. I don't think anyone was mad about the reoccurring Demogorgon. It's just brought some of that pressure and sort of stakes to the Underdark and our campaign. But yeah, so try to, maybe if you're having a problem designing a dungeon, go for this sort of ecosystem where it shares their environment, knowing that it could easily take out these other creatures. I mean, Kruthiks are powerful, coordinated, lethal monstrosities. They would be able to deal with ropers and carrion crawlers and rust monsters, but they allow them to exist so that way they can add some protection. So yeah, thanks for watching. Hope you guys enjoyed that. I'm going to continue this series with Glimmerdeep for now, and then once I'm done with Glimmerdeep, I think we'll move on to the other dungeons. There's some really good battle maps that we that is still designed for our campaign, but I think I'll use dungeons if people are interested in that. So thanks for watching. I'll see you guys in the next video. Feel free to check out our shorts, which has been bringing in a lot of new viewers. I enjoy doing them. They can be difficult to make at times. I'm not that great at lip syncing, but some of them I'm trying to push away from that. I think they're funny overall. They're a good time. They're drawing in some of you guys to some of this great content, like our VODs of our campaigns. Um, we're doing Waterdeep Dragon Heist. We're doing Out of the Abyss. I'm making music for the campaign and the worlds that we are traveling to. Some of our players have songs of their own that are up there. Overall, I'm looking forward to continuing this content, just to keep growing the channel as people are just slowly but surely letting me know that they enjoy it. I'll stop ranting now. You guys have a great night, and I will see you in the next video. Peace.